this is a pattern that I really want to encourage everyone listening to recognize happens for all of us. We all have had times when something changed very quickly and powerfully, and it lasted. And so change, it can be hard work, and you can be, struggling with something, and you can go your whole life without making a change. But you can also make a change, a profound one or a subtle one, quickly and have it last. So what is the difference? It's not just going to be about, do I get enough reps with some new habit? That's helpful for sure, but there is so much more to it. And ultimately, that's what NLP is about, is how do I quickly dial down and figure out what's the difference that's going to make the difference in this particular case for this particular person. It's always going to be different, but it's always the same process to get there. So I just want to suggest that is possible for all of us, not just possible, has happened for all of us.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jay Scherr, host of Business Minds Coffee Chat, where you get a captivating look inside the minds of game changers, risk takers, and visionaries who turn ideas into breakthroughs that shake up the world. Our mission is to give you fresh ways to think that spark growth in your business and life so you can make a mark that lasts. Let me ask you just a quick question as we are kicking off our conversation. Lots going on in your biography. Is there anything in particular that I left out that you think is relevant that we mention at this point?
It's funny. There's one thing that's very meaningful for me, and I'll say it just because, it's when you get to know what really matters to someone, then you can kind of interpret what they say and what they think so differently. So I'll just offer this. But probably the most meaningful professional thing that I got to do was to teach public high school in Brooklyn. And I discovered just this love for the craft of teaching, and that has been the motivation for everything since. It's like, what are some of the most exciting things to teach, and who can I teach to, and how can I, and so, different formats and ways of doing it. But, that was at the heart of it. I mean, these were kids who were, his last chance. They're going, it's this or they're out. Right. And it was amazing to just form those relationships and figure out how do you help someone develop. So that's something I just love doing. And hopefully you see that on the page or in any classes I take too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I am very fortunate to be around a number of educators, teachers, those that are in the administrative side of education, both public and private. And I hold so much respect and high regard for teachers, those who have the heart to be able to share knowledge, but not only share it, but to really be able to connect with students in a way where the information is relevant, where it's meaningful, where it comes to life, and where you truly have an opportunity to change lives. And I'll just share with you, this is not something that I have spoken about on this podcast often, but my life changed when I was in about the third grade. And it was because of a teacher who recognized something in me that, number one, I didn't believe about myself, and others didn't necessarily see it, but she saw something in particular. And it was because of her that I ultimately was placed in the talented and gifted program. And it radically changed my outlook on life. It changed the way that I looked at myself, the language that I was using, because life before that looked very different. So kudos to the amazing teachers out there. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I love that. So I have found through not only my own personal experience, but through clients that I work with and others as well, that there can be moments in life, and I just gave you one in mind, but moments in life that really can change the trajectory of our lives. It can be that impactful. Could you go back in time a bit for us and share one of those transformative moments that you've experienced? And if you could share with us the impact that that's had on your life.
Yeah, for sure. So one thing also, just kind of before answering that, this is a pattern that I really want to encourage everyone listening to recognize happens for all of us. We all have had times when something changed very quickly and powerfully, and it lasted. And so change, yeah, it can be hard work, and you can be, struggling with something, and you can go your whole life without making a change. But you can also make a change, a profound one or a subtle one, quickly and have it last. So what is the difference? It's not just going to be about, do I get enough reps with some new habit? That's helpful for sure, but there is so much more to it. And ultimately, that's what NLP is about, is how do I quickly dial down and figure out what's the difference that's going to make the difference in this particular case for this particular person. It's always going to be different, but it's always the same process to get there. So anyway, so here's one. So I just want to suggest that is possible for all of us, not just possible, has happened for all of us. And you can start to notice some of the ways it's happened for you as you're listening. But here's one for me that comes to mind, is that I really did not like writing. As a kid, putting pen to paper was a struggle. I don't know exactly why, but I didn't do much of it. I thought of myself as a math and science person because that came easily. And so it wasn't until actually well after college, I'm probably in my 30s at this point. And I had lots of ambitions to write, but
Okay.
I didn't like it. I didn't like the process. And a friend of mine had this wonderful thing she said that really put things in perspective. She had written a great book already. She said to me, "Do you want to write a book or do you want to have written a book?" And I was like, "Oh, I want to have written a book and I don't want to write a book." Right. And but then, so here I was. I was actually teaching an NL. I was I think an assistant trainer at the time. I forget, but maybe I was teaching the class. But it was an NLP class, and one of the exercises we did was you model excellence in yourself in one domain and you import it to another. Okay. Now, and I just want to, some people may be thinking, oh, can you do that with other people? Yes, you can. So if there's somebody on your team who's excellent at something, you can model that and help other people take it on. It's totally doable. We do it all the time. But in this case, you're looking at yourself in a different context. And so somebody there in the room was interested in learning what I thought I did a good job at, and enjoyed doing, which was figuring out how to make a small New York City apartment really work, right? In terms of maximizing the space and the layout, making it look good, functional, all that, right? Making it look bigger than it is, essentially. And I took pride in it. I felt good about it. I enjoyed it. So anyway, we go through this process. She's understanding my mental model for this. And I discovered quite a few things about this mental model. Wasn't planning to apply it to writing. Sometime that week, I'm like, okay, I've decided I'm going to try to work on this article, right? And I dawned on me I could apply this approach, these ideas that had to do with things like, here's an example of it. One of them was that I just gave myself the freedom to not need to believe that it could all work out before I started. With an apartment, I'd just be like, well, I'd like to have a nice big table, and I would also like to have space to walk through, and I would also like to have the colors match, and I would also like all these things that just couldn't happen together. But that didn't bother me. I would sit with it because I would allow myself to connect with all that. So this is one of the things that I started doing with writing that same week. It had dawned on me because the pattern was clear. And so sure enough, I started doing that. I started writing down all these things that I would like the article to start in these 5 different ways, for example. They can't start in 5 different ways, but it didn't matter to me. I was able to just, so that was just one of many things that I discovered through modeling excellence in this one area of creativity and applying it to another. From that point on, I love writing. And I have written now 2 bestsellers, right? They're good books, objectively. Other people have said, third-party endorsements. I've gotten, I've got publishers behind them, right? In each one, I've got, Harper and Macmillan, right? And so translation deals, there's translations coming for the new book, and there were 10 translations or 10 languages total for the last book. So, my articles, I've written most of everything I've written since then. I enjoy the process. I look forward to it. It's a totally different experience. And it would basically one day changed forever for the better. And it's because I was able to discover the differences that make the difference for me.
That is so powerful. And I love the way that through telling that story, you've weaved in certainly some of the language around NLP. So I'm taking notes as we're talking here. And you talked about modeling excellence. You talked about the mental model. You talked about patterns. And what I love about this is, especially in your case and the story that you just provided, was the change in belief, self-belief. So there was a stage in life where you didn't like writing. You told yourself you didn't like writing. You were a math and science person, not a writer. And it's really interesting how when we have those beliefs that often don't even necessarily come from us, right? They could be coming from our parents. They could be generationally. They could be biases that we hold. But whatever it was, there was something that you believed about yourself that you found out later in life wasn't true. And you made some shifts there, which when you made those shifts, it allowed you to then be able to create these works of art that you've been able to bring to all of us. So what I'd like to find out from you is, as we dig more deeply into NLP, first, I want to give a little bit of context. If you could, let's start by sharing with our audience what NLP is. Many people may have heard of it. Many people may have heard different opinions and perspectives on it. And then there's others that are going to have no idea what we're talking about. So what is it? And what isn't NLP in terms of what we're going to be talking about here?
Yeah. So NLP, I've noticed a generational divide that people roughly over 50 have heard of it, and people under 50 more often have not heard of it. And if they have experience with it personally, they tend to be very positive about it. If they've only come across it tangentially, that's when some people have heard, oh, I've heard some mixed things, and other people have heard, I've heard terrible things, I've heard good things. And so here's what NLP is. So it stands for neuro-linguistic programming. I don't think the name is worth spending time trying to unpack. Essentially, we can if you want, but essentially it's a collection of tools from psychotherapy that are very good at helping people to make changes quickly that last. And the tools, well, I guess what's special about NLP is that you're not just learning the tools, you're also learning the process for learning more tools. When you spot with this thing about modeling excellence we talked about, as well as a set of beliefs that enable you to most effectively use these tools. And the reason, kind of where it comes from and why it's so powerful, this is now 50 years ago, we're in the 1970s. There are all these new therapies that are coming out in the 60s and 70s, psychotherapies. Now they have names like cognitive behavioral therapy and ACT and DBT and hypnotherapy and gestalt therapy and family therapy and so forth. And now 50 years on, most of it has research support too. But at the time, there's not much research, hardly any research on this stuff. It's just new. And what's apparent to many people in the world of psychotherapy, at least at that point, was that you've got these pioneers who are just getting results so much faster and with so many more people than in more traditional psychoanalytic forms of therapy. So they're wanting to learn it. My parents are among them. You know, they had a family therapy institute for many years until they retired. And so the way people did it at the time was just to go and try to observe and copy what they saw these pioneers doing. What was special about NLP was you've got a linguist, a linguistics professor, and a partner of his who are going in and looking at the form, not the content. They're saying, okay, what are the language patterns and the nonverbal patterns that these therapists are picking up on, and what are the ones they're using to quickly make connections, to build trust, to enable people to step out of their comfort zones, to help people to explore new ideas, to become aware of how they're thinking, and so forth, to be open to change. And they did a really nice job of kind of codifying that and teaching it. And they got endorsements from some of the people they were studying saying, this is really fantastic. You know, they understand what I'm doing better than I did before now, you know. But they also taught the process that they used called modeling for understanding what these therapists were doing. And so it's generative. You can just keep going. Anytime there's a skill you or someone else has, you can learn from that using this process. Anytime you're failing to do something, you can model that and really quickly get into what is getting in the way. Why am I stopping myself? Is it, as in the example where I was talking about writing, there was, as you pointed out, there was an identity aspect. I'm a math and science guy. And also I had these beliefs that it's hard, that it's unpleasant, because at that point, the best way I knew how to write was hard and unpleasant. You know, I had these beliefs that I had to choose a way to start before exploring all the options, right? There were certain skills I did and didn't have, and so forth. So there's so many things you can unpack. NLP is just great at helping you to do that very quickly, and to kind of recognize where the name neuro-linguistic programming I find to be helpful is that it points you towards how language and thought interact. That when people are speaking, it is often reflective of what they're thinking. Not that you can read someone's mind, but in the sense that people reveal often limiting beliefs or relationships they have with a thought in the way they speak. So if someone says, I really should be getting back to so-and-so, okay, I should be. So there's a relationship they have with that thing they have to do where it feels heavy and they don't want to do it and they're fighting with themselves. Right? Okay, so there's probably some limiting belief there as well, because why would they be trying to do something that they're fighting themselves with? Something doesn't add up. And you learn to be very curious and not believe that you know what the other person's thinking, but to recognize something doesn't add up and to ask questions and to ask really useful questions. So that's kind of the essence of it. So that in that way, language reflects thought, but also you can kind of use language to influence thought in the sense that you can help someone have a different relationship, or at least explore a different relationship with the things they need to do. You know, it's like,
okay, so let's.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Finish your thought.
Yeah. Okay. Last thing. I promise. I've been going for a while. So
no, you're good.
It's like I should do this. All right. Well, what would happen if you didn't do that? You know, and we just take them to that next step. That kind of language, what would happen if it's a non-confrontational, easy way to help someone get to a place where they're willing to explore the idea and they're not just stuck in that moment. They're going to explore what happens as life goes on, because life always goes on, but in our minds we get stuck.
Excellent. So that was going to be my question. So how do we reframe that differently, which you just gave the perfect example. So I'm glad that you did that. And it speaks to what you were going through when you were interacting with the author who you knew, who really, it almost seems like it removes the pressure and the self-imposed barriers that we've constructed in our mind. So when perhaps you thought that writing, there was a certain way that it needed to be done, you were able to reframe that using different language, and the barriers came down. It gave you more freedom to explore and not feel that sense of pressure, perhaps. Is that fair to say, or am I absolutely off base?
No, I think it's right on target. That's really one of the aims that we've got in mind when you're using NLP is how can I help expand this person's mental model so that they're willing to explore new ways of being and new ways of thinking. You're not making anyone do anything. You can't. They have to choose to, but I can do some things that will make it easier for them to explore the idea and see if it fits for them. And that's the whole idea.
Okay, so I want to go back to your parents for a moment. So you brought them up. You had mentioned that they, for many years, they had run a family therapy institute. So we're talking about Susan and Don, mom and dad. So you basically grew up in an environment around NLP. Your parents were both NLP practitioners.
Yeah, that's right. So they were psychotherapists, and they made great use of NLP, and they just had so many stories where they were able to do incredible things, and they had wonderful reputations, and and a lot of times they would attribute it to NLP. It's like this is the magic. This is the thing that helps me very quickly recognize the kind of way a person's stuck and help them to shift.
The difference that makes the difference.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
which is a common phrase in NLP circles. The difference that makes the difference. It is really, I think, the heart of what we're doing there. Staying curious, looking for the difference that makes the difference, and then we just have some wonderful tools for doing so.
Excellent. So and I just want to stay with your parents for just another moment or two, because they were psychotherapists who were trained in using various types of therapy. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Not just NLP. They were.
Oh yeah. No, they were already
they understood
working professionally when they first came across it. I think my mom wanted to really study what Dr. Milton Erickson was doing in the late 70s. He's kind of the father of hypnotherapy, and it's incredible stuff. And she couldn't because she had two little kids, and so she hears about these guys who have studied Erickson, and Erickson gave them a wonderful endorsement, and so she said, "All right, I'll sign up and take their class and see what this is." And so that's how the whole thing started in terms of them getting into it.
Interesting. And we're referring to John Grinder and Richard Bandler. Okay.
Right.
All right. So they were direct students of those two who I suppose are known as the
founders.
The founders of NLP.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sure that many people who are going to be listening right now have certainly heard the name Tony Robbins. And I remember when I was first introduced to Tony Robbins, which was when his first book came out, when it was first published. And that was, I remember purchasing that book and reading it on the beach on a trip. And he was not known the way that he is known today, but the more I was introduced to that work, that's when I first became exposed to NLP. And so as you think about someone like a Tony Robbins and the impact that he's had, knowing that these teachings and learnings have been instrumental for him in being able to help create transformation, is it fair to say that anyone can learn the tools? Not anyone can be a Tony Robbins or you or anyone else for that matter. They're going to be the version of themselves who can be better as a result of incorporating these tools? Can anyone learn the tools and apply them effectively and see change in their lives?
Short answer, yes. I have never come across a situation where there was someone who was unable to learn the tools. In terms of like, are you going to then be me or be Tony? So, it's, well, we're all different, right? So it's quite unlikely. That said, there is this belief, one of the foundational beliefs in NLP, that if it's possible for someone else in the world, it's possible for me. And this is the kind of thing where we call it a presupposition. We invite you to presuppose it in all contexts. And because it's a statement about all contexts, it could never be proven, right? So this is not what could be, if something can't be proven, it can't be part of the world of science either, right? But is it useful? You can still explore, is this belief useful for me? One of the reasons, though, that we say it is because when you understand someone's mental model, it's possible to find those things that they have done, how they think of themselves, what they believe, what they value, what actions they take, how they handle setbacks, etc. Right? How they interact in their environment. It's just sort of, there's many things you can learn that are really about their mental model of the situation they find themselves in. And I would be very much surprised if there's not something extremely useful for you if you are someone who says, I want to be more like Tony Robbins in this particular way. There probably will be quite a lot that's useful. And something that, in my opinion, it seems that he has done is that he has also used some of these tools to model himself, it seems to me, I'm guessing, but it looks like that from the outside, to kind of really unpack a lot of these things about his mental model for the way he works. And so he'll teach that. And he'll use the NLP tools to help teach it, and he'll teach the NLP tools as well. I've also done the same. One of the classes that I love teaching is a public speaking class, and it's about how to enjoy public speaking because I really enjoy it. I love it. It's going back to that thing about teaching. Like, I love teaching. And it's like, if you're someone who wants to learn how to enjoy public speaking, or how do the people who do it, who love it, do it, not just how do I get through it, there's a tremendous amount in NLP for how to choose your own state, how to think differently about how you show up, your role, your purpose in it, your identity, all these things that are useful, and the expectations you set for yourself, many things. So I teach that, and I think that you incorporate what's useful for you, you incorporate what fits within your belief system, but if you were to want to, I don't see any logical reason why you couldn't really become a lot more like me in terms of how I present, and enjoy it a lot more like how I enjoy it, right? And why you couldn't be as productive as Tony in certain areas, and why you couldn't, if that was what you were really focused on, right? Or one of the things I think that he has managed to do, again, I have to try to understand this from the outside, but is to really enjoy his life, be at peace with, he's got so many things that he's doing, but he's not someone who's stressed out and feeling like he's missed out on things. Like, as far as I understand, he is present with his family, and he does do these cool things, that he tries to lift a lot of people up, and he is looking for whether, there's people who needs additional psychological help if they're in a training and that kind of thing. So it seems to me that he is managing to kind of fire on all cylinders. And so if that's what I want in my life, I probably can learn quite a lot from how he's doing it. And but it's gonna fit with what else I believe about myself. Like, how do I want to be? Who do I want to be? And how do I like to relate to people? So I wouldn't end up being him, just because I doubt that would ever end up fully being the goal for me or anyone.
So let's talk a bit more about the mental model. You've mentioned it more than once. You've given some insight to it, but I want to give a bit more explanation there for those that may be new to the language itself. So is So let's take a mental model for you. Let's just get personal here. So what would that mental model look like? If I said one day, if I, after reading your book and watching this interview and listening to talks that you've given, if I said, you know what, I want to be more like Josh Davis. I want to understand more about him, how he's wired, how he thinks, and I want to be as confident as him. I want to enjoy public speaking like he does. I want to enjoy writing the way that he does. Where do I start?
So I think one thing that would be smart would be to focus on a context, either a particular skill or inner resource or something that I do that you'd say, well, I like that. Because your mental model will be different in different cases. And yeah, thanks for coming back to this, because I've tossed out this term mental model a bunch of times. And what does it mean? So I think in my opinion, the core idea in NLP is that people don't react to reality. They react to their version of reality. And their version of reality is this mental model. So you and I were coming to this conversation. We have different life experiences, right? We have had different things that have made us happy or sad. We have different beliefs about what we're trying to accomplish in a conversation. There's overlap. Obviously, we're going to be able to talk, right? But, we have different experiences about what certain facial expressions mean to some degree, right? There's just so many differences, right? And we can't. We're just not going to have the exact same belief about everything that's going on right here in this moment. It's not possible. You operate based on your understanding of reality. I based on my understanding of reality, and we both look at it as reality. We're not questioning it. It just seems like reality. But if I can come into this conversation and be open to this idea that you and I have slightly different realities, then if I want to enable any kind of change or communicate effectively, then it really helps if I start to get curious about your reality and ask questions. It's like, if you say like, hey, let's have an awesome podcast. Great. I also want an awesome podcast. But what does awesome mean to you? And what would make that awesome? And we had a little bit of a chat at the beginning about kind of what are we trying to accomplish and how do we want to interact? And that's great. You don't always do that at the beginning of a podcast. But you can't just assume these things, or you can, but you'll be wrong a lot more than you realize. Right. So we start to get curious, right? Been there. And so it's funny, like you say, been there. And just now, I'm not saying you should do this, but I'm saying that I am aware. I don't exactly know what there means for you. Right. And so if I say like, oh, what was your experience? I'm going to learn so much more. I'm going to be able to relate to you so much better than if I'm just like, oh yeah, like you get it. You said been there. Right? Because it probably isn't exactly the same. And maybe there was an emotional learning for you there, something like that. So that your mental model is going to be typically there's one way I find useful to think of it is something that Robert Dilts helped to articulate and create called the logical levels. Robert Dilts is one of the founders of NLP, as he's been as influential in the field as anyone. And just such a wonderful, sweet person. The logical levels. And so this, identity, beliefs, values, capabilities, behavior, environment. And sometimes you can add another one at the top, like spiritual, like who are you in the larger context of things, beyond yourself. That is a useful, I think, set of filters for trying to understand somebody else's reality in a particular context.
Okay.
And it'll be different from different. So it's their mental model. Now, the mental model also can include, though, that certain things for me equal good or bad, and I have an emotional reaction, or I have a mental image. Maybe I think about If I'm someone who doesn't like writing, maybe when I think about writing, I get this feeling of like, ugh, right? And I might have a mental image of a gray cloud and like, it's over here and I'm trying to look away from it in my mind's eye. That's also part of the mental model. That's also part of my reality in that context.
Okay.
And one of the fun things in NLP is that you can change any aspect of that. I could take that gray cloud, and I would invite everyone listening right now, think of something that they're sort of avoiding, that they don't like thinking about. Is there some mental image in mind? It's for most people to be visual. Maybe you're hearing yourself say something, I don't know. But when you take that mental image, what happens when you make it far away and you make it smaller? What happens when you make it a little blurry? What happens when you turn down the brightness, make it less bright, or turn down the color? Some people might enjoy having it pop out of the image. Some people might want to keep it. Some people might want to experiment with bringing it closer and making it vivid. Maybe that feels better. Or maybe they just want to experiment with that. And you can choose where you put this and how it shows up. That's part of your mental model. And it makes a difference. I don't know, are you trying it right now, Jay?
I am, and I'm thinking about something in particular, but I want to ask you a question about this as our audience is listening to you go through this. So I was thinking about tax preparation. So,
right.
the planning, gathering the documents, going through that whole process. And the visual in my mind is a very heavy weight. Like I don't have necessarily an image of the weight, but I feel the heaviness, and it's a very dark image, and it's almost it's an overwhelming feeling. So when I'm going through the process of preparing and working with my tax preparer, leading up to that is very cumbersome for me because I'm going to use the term making a mountain out of a molehill. It's really not that. It's not as significant as I visualize it to be. So it's almost as if once I start the process, just get started and let momentum start to build, it makes it so much easier. But before I actually start, the stories I'm telling myself, the visual imagery, the pressure I feel, it's horrible.
And what happens if we take that, right, that mountain, and what if we put it down low and you make it kind of small, the size of a molehill? And what happens if you make it light, shine some light on it? It was dark before.
Yes.
And how's this so far? What's happening when we do that?
When I do that, I feel like it is changing the feeling I have toward the thing. So as opposed to it being this huge, overwhelming mess in front of me, by you helping me look at it differently, making it smaller, changing the light that I see in my mind's eye, maybe changing the volume of, because for me it's like that ba 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 ba, right? It's huge.
What happens when you make it just like a little ba 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 quiet?
Yeah, all of that is changing my relationship with it. Mm-hmm. So it makes it more palatable. Perhaps
more palatable. How does it taste now?
I need to pour some sugar coating on that as well.
Go ahead.
Yeah, why not?
Add some sugar. How does that
Why
taste?
not? Now I want more of it.
Right. The thing is, we do think in terms of these sensory modalities. It's just like that's what we're made of. Our brains and our bodies are these incredible machines for sensation and perception and action, right? Of course we use them to think, we think, you think that's where metaphors come from. It's like, it's the stuff of thinking. And so, that's part of how you represent a situation. In other words, your mental model. You can change that and explore what happens. It's going to be different in each case. In this particular case, you mentioned heavy. So I said, let's explore light. You mentioned mountain and molehill. So I said, let's make it smaller, like a molehill. You mentioned dark. So, you mentioned loud. So we explore quiet, right? And you don't know, but you explore it. And it's very common that when you make these changes, it does make a difference, makes it easier to see things differently. You're literally seeing it differently in your mind's eye. And, there's also, you could choose to see things differently by taking a different perspective as well. That would be another shift in your mental models. Are you looking at it from first person perspective or from third person perspective? What happens when you kind of look through the window and like, oh, there's Jay over there sitting there at his computer thinking about taxes, but I'm over here letting him have his feelings, right? And as you look at Jay over there having those feelings, why is he feeling the way he's feeling?
This to me is truly fascinating. And I mean, I'll be candid with you. I can imagine that some people who are listening to us right now who've never thought about the way they feel towards something, where they haven't maybe put a visual to it, or the sound, or the amount of light, the feelings that are attached to that. I can imagine them thinking, well, this sounds awfully woo-woo, but
sounds weird.
But this is science backed. Right. There's
research on what happens if you take a mental image and move it farther away, right? And it tends to make the emotions less intense. There's research on what happens if you take that third person perspective of a fly on the wall and then explore why things are operating how they're operating. So there's, at this point in history, so many of these things that are part of NLP have been researched under different names. And because I know kind of both worlds, I've drawn those connections. And so that's something that hasn't been done before. And that was another reason why, I think we needed to write the book. So we draw those connections here. And there's a couple of things that don't really have as strong, not many, but there were a couple of things that don't really have as strong of a research backing. And so then I think it makes sense to say, well, okay, maybe we let that go, or maybe we modify it, or maybe we take it with a grain of salt and say, okay, use it as a hypothesis generator, but don't use it as a fact, right? So some people might have come across this one thing. It's sort of like, we almost didn't put it in the book because, like, if you don't have it, if you don't know this tool, it doesn't really change anything else in NLP, but it's been talked about a lot. Usually it's the one that's picked on the most if you have come across critiques of NLP, which is something about eye accessing cues, is what they call it, where if somebody's kind of looking up, they tend to be, it may reflect that they're thinking visually. If they're kind of in the middle, it may reflect they're thinking auditorily, and when they're looking down, it may reflect that they are thinking kinesthetically, like body emotions, right? And like certainly, like, at least in cultural norms, that shows up. You see it in cartoons, visual, picture yourself, right? It's look up, right?
Sure.
And like feelings, somebody's going to look down. Is it actually the case? There hasn't been much consistent evidence one way or the other. It's like eye movements are determined by so many things. So maybe there's a relationship. Certainly nobody's been able to document it convincingly. But I still think, like, because it is such a common thing in culture, if somebody's looking up, you might wonder, are you picturing something? And like, so what do you have to lose? You say, are you picturing something right now? Right? Or if you say, picture this, and you look up and you invite them to look up, it's like no harm done, right? Why not? If somebody's looking down a lot, you might explore, like, are you, how are you feeling? And they might really connect with that. Right.
I know I often look up and probably to the right when I'm thinking about something, or if you were to ask me to visualize something in particular, I'm probably going to be looking up for whatever reason. And I don't know if that's because, to your point, culturally, I've heard for so many years since I was, a very young person that, we often look up and to the right when we're contemplating or visualizing or thinking about something. But yeah, there's that whole study of body language and nonverbal. I think that's fascinating too. I think there's, questions on the validity of certain aspects of that. Like as an example, standing in a certain posture or crossing arms as an example does not always mean that someone is defensive or they're trying to hide something or, whatever. But I think it's worth exploring and then doing your own due diligence, right? Asking those questions. But what I really appreciate, and I think this is where you were going with this, is that in your book, you and your co-author have done such a great job of taking what can sometimes be complex information, deep information, and you've distilled it in such a way that it's practical and applicable for everyone. And I really appreciate the approach that you took. And I was going to ask you, because I know you've been asked this question before, but I was going to ask you, are there aspects of NLP that are pseudoscience? Because you hear that. You hear sometimes the negative or the dark side of NLP for those who have been exposed to it before. And I think like many things, and I'd love to hear your response on this, I think like many things, anything can be taken to extremes and anything can be used for positive reasons. And then if someone has ill intent, they can probably figure out a way to use almost anything for that as well. So how do you respond to is NLP pseudoscience?
Yeah. And if you, you can find that online for sure. It's interesting because from the beginning, nobody was claiming that it was science. In fact, I think that historically they were kind of took the attitude, a lot of people involved took the attitude that we're not trying to do science. This is a practical set of tools and we're seeing what, seems to work and we're operating that way, which is how, I think many psychotherapies started too, just to try stuff out, what seems to work. Now, the reason for science, in my opinion, for any science, is because of the confirmation bias, that we have a bias, we have a tendency to notice information that confirms what we think and not notice information that doesn't, right? So when you just say, oh, it works, that's how I know, well, a scientific approach would be to say, let's count up the numbers and see how many times does it work, and is that more than you'd expect by chance? And that's science, right? And so over time now, I think when you look at you can't subject a whole field. Like you couldn't say, has there been a study to show that cognitive behavioral therapy works? Well, no, there's been a ton of studies to show that a particular tool within cognitive therapy works, right? Or behavioral therapy works. And so if you look at the particular tools within NLP, then you see that many of them show up in these other therapies and have been studied, right? Like we were saying with the changing, perspective that we were talking about. So now I think we actually can say that there is scientific support for much of this. Somebody could always argue, well, this particular way that it's done in a therapeutic context, so then we're getting into clinical trials. And over time, that's been an issue for all forms of therapy. And NLP, by the way, is I'm not saying it's a form of therapy. It's something many therapists use, but it can be applied in many different contexts as well. And that's one thing. We're aiming to take it out of a therapy context and make it accessible, democratize it, simple to understand. Like we didn't invent the stuff, but what Greg and I did for the last couple of years is to think hard about how to teach it in a simple way. It's very complex, And so I think that's why it took 50 years to get to this point where we can really teach it in a simple way and make it easy to apply. But but yeah, so I would say also I agree with you. If something is powerful, if it's useful, then with somebody being unethical, they can use it in a harmful way. Now, here's something else though that I've come to believe, that I would not call what they're doing, if there's somebody using it to manipulate others, I would not call that NLP, because I take very seriously the presuppositions of NLP. I mean, these are beliefs that, with these attitudes and these sort of fundamental beliefs, you are much more effective at using any NLP tool. And they include things like assuming good intentions, right? And right, there's these very positive tools that essentially lead you to have unconditional positive regard, if you know that term, for the person you're working with or helping, whether it's yourself or someone else. So if somebody's trying to manipulate you, at best they like get something in a transactional way, and then everybody can see through it. You know you've been manipulated and you hate the person, right?
Right.
Or you hate yourself, or both, right? It's like it's not like you miss it, right? So that's not NLP. That's trying to trick someone. And maybe you know about a couple of tools from NLP that enabled you to apply it in that bad way, but that's you're not doing NLP then.
That's a fair point.
And it's not a problem specific to NLP, except for NLP can be so powerful that, you know, it's among the things that people can use. It's right. It's very powerful. So there is that. So that's how I would address those kind of two critiques, which, yeah, it's like some people who have heard of NLP have come across those, some haven't, some don't care. And my experience lately has been that I'm actually the one getting to introduce NLP to most people at this point.
How fantastic is that?
Yeah, yeah.
I love that. So, what do your parents think about your book?
Are they proud of me?
Have they read it, and have they critiqued it, and what are their general thoughts or comments?
I did care a lot about their opinions on it because they're experts. They've been using this stuff
Sure.
forever. I didn't actually study NLP with them. I knew about it. I knew about some of the things that you could make happen, and occasionally, like my experience having psychotherapists for parents was, I don't think, typical. I just had understanding parents, right? And so, who were able to also deal with their own issues. So they didn't put that on us, right? So it was nice. And we still have, you know, I have a wonderful relationship with my parents. So does my brother. And it's really, you know, fortunate thing, and more rare perhaps than it should be, or certainly not perhaps, of course, like more rare than it should be. But I really learned NLP once I was in my 20s, and I studied somewhere else where they recommended I study, at the NLP Center of New York. But anyway, so they have read it, and it was important to me to get their sense of whether I was being true to NLP, accurate about it. Also, they know more about the early days than I do, and so, you know, did I represent that properly? Sometimes it was helpful to be able to go to them and say, like, you know, I'm struggling to figure out what would be a nice like what sort of key to making this thing work that I'm trying to teach about. And they could help with that sort of thing. We could have that discussion because they knew it all. So that was really, you know, a really nice thing to have in my back pocket as like people to go to.
Beautiful. So you actually brought
and
this.
Their opinion
Yes.
is that I and Greg have successfully, in their minds, done something that nobody else has done, which is to truly make it accessible and easy to understand.
How about that?
Yeah.
So then I'm going to go back to
lot.
something good. I'm going to go back to something that you had mentioned when I asked if your parents had read it and what their comments were. You said, "Are they proud of me?" And my question to you is not, are they proud of you, but are you proud of yourself?
I
And
am.
regardless of the book, Are
not
you
about.
are you proud of yourself?
I am. Um, yeah, I still beat myself up. Don't get me wrong. I'm like, oh, I should have done this, and I can't believe I'm not doing that, and am I letting my wife down and things like that, right?
Wait a
I
minute, you're
do that.
human?
I do that. Yes, I do that. But baseline, big picture, kind of what's there in the background and where I return to. Um, I really feel like I'm getting to use some of what I see as my gifts and, um, you know, form these kind of. I love the connection with another person where they're kind of seeing something differently in a really useful way. And I'm getting to do that in person, on Zoom, through the book. Now, with the book, I have to imagine it, and I had to learn how to imagine it because I can't actually talk to the person. So I get feedback sometimes, and if you have great feedback, please let me know. I love hearing it, but I have learned to imagine it, and that's part of it. I've learned to really think about what I want out of life in the different areas of life. And that was something that Tony Robbins was helpful for me in thinking about. Um, and I've, you know, these things, yeah, I really am proud of where I am, but I have this constant you know, like there is still an element of is it enough and what do I want to do and can I rest on my laurels? That's all there. It's definitely there. Yeah.
So,
But I
for all of you that are watching and listening right now, I want you to make sure that you heard that. Even Josh, who, with all that he's been able to accomplish, his study and knowledge of NLP, writing a definitive book about NLP, still deals with many of the things that we all do and has to continue to do that work. But I do believe that is part of the human experience. But the beauty is, Josh, is that you have many tools in your toolbox to be able to handle and work through those situations, work through that language, work through that self-talk. And I know that everyone that's watching and listening right now, they will benefit greatly also by all of the tools that are available to you in The Difference That Makes the Difference, which we, of course, will link to in the show notes. And Josh, two quick things. I've got one ask and one final question to you. So my ask is this. I would love it if you would give all of us, including me, one challenge. What is something that you would challenge us to do starting as soon as possible?
Starting as soon as possible. All right. So here's a challenge. So um, I would like you to, when you find yourself resisting something, doing something that you want to be doing or you feel like you should be doing, or you find somebody else resisting, I'd like you to explore this question, and then the rest is up to you. But this is, can you catch it? And then stop and ask yourself this question. How is it serving, if it's you resisting, how is it serving me to resist doing this thing? And if it's somebody else resisting, how is it serving them? And it may be that you can just ask directly, how is it serving you to not do this thing or to resist me or to resist this? But it may be that you have to ask several questions, kind of get at it, explore it. So that would be my homework assignment or a challenge for you. Catch yourself in a moment of resistance or another person and just start to really get curious. How is it serving me or how is it serving them to resist? And then once you get the answer, the rest is up to you.
I love it. That's great. And I know personally I'm going to be able to apply or put that challenge into practice very, very soon. So thank you for that one. And here is my final question to you. What is one of the most valuable, unexpected lessons that you've learned from one of your leadership clients? The most valuable, unexpected lesson you've learned from one of your clients?
From one of my clients.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. So, I would say one of the most valuable unexpected lessons I've learned from one of my clients. I had a situation where um, I was coming in trying to please, right? And like be a people pleaser, wanted them to like me, wanted them to, right? And feeling almost a little bit like a burden, like I didn't, um, and then I decided to show up a little differently because I don't know, I think I was like kind of thinking about what's going on there and what am I doing, right? A little bit of modeling failure as a, my right to see what am I doing, uh, and I realized that I was smiling too much. I started smiling less. Uh, and what that did for me is that I started focusing more on what I needed and what I wanted and caring less about trying to get their approval.
Okay.
And I think they felt more comfortable with me because I felt more wanted and more included at that point, that it was easier to be there and be like, oh, it was like kind of the opposite of what I expected. That's one that comes to mind right now. There's others that, I'm sure that now that you've asked the question, I'll be thinking about them throughout the day. But that's one thing that was a big eye opener for me.
That is so interesting. I thank you for sharing that. And if any others come up today as you're thinking about that question a little bit, I would love it if you would maybe email me or send me an audio clip of you saying, kind of sharing that message. I would appreciate that. And Josh, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. This has really been a thought-provoking and insightful conversation, and I appreciate you allowing the conversation to go in a multitude of different directions and sharing some of your knowledge, wisdom, and experience. So I'm grateful for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, great conversation.
I definitely felt the same way. And for all of you, I want to thank you so very much for tuning in, for watching, and for listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you please take just a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify? That helps us expand our reach and continue to attract incredible guests just like Josh. And to listen to more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button. And my friends, until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure you run out and pick up a copy of The Difference That Makes the Difference. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.